Hey there, history enthusiasts and seekers of the most esoteric trivia. Before we dive into the riveting world of Byzantine imperial robe hem length specifications, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on loop so you can bask in this glorious tedium repeatedly. Yes, you heard it right. This week, we're peeling back the layers of an exceptionally dull topic that's sure to transform your social life into a veritable conversation starter. Or perhaps a conversation ender. Now you might be wondering, why the hem length of Byzantine robes? And to that, I say, why not? In a world where the color of your socks can spark a debate, we've decided to champion the unsung hero of imperial fashion, the hem. Picture this. The Byzantine Empire, a dazzling center of culture, trade, and bureaucracy, was also deeply concerned with the precise specifications of how long their emperor's robes should be. Forget the conquests, the epic battles, and the theological disputes. What really mattered was whether the hem grazed the floor or barely skimmed the ankles. And oh, how the debates raged. Menanin, Shi, Tiwa, Zhao, Peshuo. You see, these hem lengths weren't just about aesthetics. They were a reflection of social hierarchy, political stability, and sometimes the emperor's breakfast choices. Did you know that a hem that was a mere inch too long could spell disaster for an emperor's reputation? I mean, who knew the line between being regal and looking like you tripped over a rug could be so thin? In this video, we'll explore the intricate rules laid down by imperial decree, the debates in the courts of Constantinople, and the impact of fabric choice on these crucial measurements. Spoiler alert, silk was a game changer. So, settle in with your favorite drink, dim the lights, if you must, and allow your mind to wander into the farthest reaches of clothing specifications where most historians fear to tread. This is going to be an adventure of epic proportions. Not in the traditional sense, of course, but in the realm of meticulous detail, where an inch can feel like a mile. Just remember to relax. You're in for the ride of a lifetime, or at least an afternoon. No, hardly. The Byzantine Empire, a realm renowned for its intricate politics, awe-inspiring architecture, and of course, its deeply riveting obsession with imperial hem lengths. Now, you might be thinking, how on earth could the length of a robe hem lead to such an elaborate narrative? Well, dear viewer, prepare for a thrilling plunge into the abyss of bureaucratic minutiae, where the fabric of history is woven with threads of awe, tedium, and precision. Let's start with the bureaucratic labyrinth surrounding the imperial robe hem length specifications. In the illustrious halls of the Great Palace of Constantinople, where the air was thick with the scent of intrigue, and probably a bit of fish stew, one could find the Imperial Wardrobe Office. Yes, an actual office dedicated to the sartorial needs of the emperor. This office functioned much like a modern-day corporate HR department, but with fewer coffee breaks and more Byzantine intrigue. The officials who worked there, known as the drapers of the palace, were charged with the monumental task of maintaining the imperial wardrobe, which included everything from undergarments to the grandest of robes. Now, to ensure that each hem length was fit for a ruler, these drapers employed an elaborate inventory procedure that would make even the most fastidious librarian weep with joy, or perhaps boredom. Every piece of fabric was meticulously catalogued, with details that included material type, color, weight, and crucially, hem length specifications. A simple robe could have as many as 30 different entries in the inventory logs, with notes in elegant Greek script that would make you question the very nature of human penmanship. One might wonder, how did they arrive at these hem lengths? The answer lies in a series of imperial edicts, lovingly penned by emperors who clearly had too much time on their hands. Each edict was a veritable tome of rules and regulations, designed to ensure that the hem lengths of the emperor's robes were not just a matter of personal preference, but a reflection of the state's political climate and social hierarchy. Who knew that the fate of the empire could rest on the delicate balance of fabric and thread? For instance, a decree from Emperor Justinian II, affectionately known as the Slit-Nosed, specified that the hem of the imperial robe should not exceed 32 inches from the ground, lest the emperor trip and tumble into a pit of scandal. This decree also mandated that the material be of the highest quality silk, which, as we all know, could only be imported from one of the many bustling silk markets of the East. And just like that, a simple hem became a matter of international trade and diplomacy. You see, if the emperor's robe hem was deemed too long, it could signal to foreign dignitaries that the empire was weakening, like a pair of old trousers that had seen better days. Now, let's talk about fabric costs. Oh, the costs. Silk, while luxurious, did not come cheap. The Byzantine Empire was notorious for its complicated taxation system, which often left the imperial wardrobe department in a perpetual state of financial uncertainty. Imagine a room full of drapers sweating over the price of silk as they calculated how many gold coins they needed to acquire just a few yards of the finest material. The budget discussions must have been positively exhilarating. Do we allocate funds for the emperor's new robe? Or do we just keep patching the old one? This often led to heated debates among the drapers, who were not just tailors, but also unofficial political advisors. Remember, gentlemen, one might have said, a hem that's too short can make our emperor look like he's been raiding the local thrift shop, whereas a hem that's too long could have him dragging through mud. And we all know how rumors spread in this city. It was a precarious balance, and one that was maintained through sheer force of will, or perhaps divine intervention. But the cost of silk wasn't the only consideration. There were also the logistics of transporting these precious fabrics. Given that Constantinople was at the crossroads of trade routes, one would think it would be a straightforward task. However, Byzantine merchants were notorious for their penchant for embellishment and exaggeration. Oh yes, my lord, we've got the finest silk, hand-woven by the nuns of the Holy Land, they would proclaim, while behind the scenes, they were actually sourcing from local markets where the quality was, let's say, questionable at best. Once the desired materials were procured, the next step was the creation of the robes themselves. This was where the real magic, or perhaps drudgery, occurred. The seamstresses, often referred to as the Stitchers of Fate, were tasked with crafting garments that would withstand the test of time, both in style and political relevance. They would gather in dimly lit rooms, their fingers deftly maneuvering through yards of silk and brocade, whispering tales of court intrigue as they stitched. The precision required was nothing short of miraculous, with each robe requiring a veritable army of stitches to ensure the hem was exactly the right length. And heaven help the poor soul who miscalculated. The consequences could be dire. A simple mistake could instigate a chain reaction of gossip throughout the empire. Did you see how long the emperor's hem was at the last ceremony? What's next? A tunic with polka dots. Such scandal could shake the very foundations of Byzantine society. Let's not forget the cultural implications of hem lengths. The Byzantines were deeply superstitious, and clothing often played a role in their rituals and beliefs. A robe worn by the emperor during a significant event was often thought to imbue the wearer with divine favor, or conversely, bring about a curse if the hem was deemed inappropriate. This led to a dizzying array of practices surrounding robe wearing, including the consultation of oracles and soothsayers. Imagine a priestess of Apollo gazing at a hem and declaring, "Nay, for the fates have spoken. This hem is an omen of doom." As we delve deeper into the complexities of Byzantine imperial fashion, it becomes apparent that the hem length was not just a trivial matter of aesthetics, but a powerful symbol of authority and governance. The very act of measuring and cutting fabric was akin to cutting through the tangled web of political maneuvering. Each robe that graced the emperor's shoulders was a testament to centuries of tradition and an intricate understanding of how to navigate the treacherous waters of courtly life. So, as you sip your drink and ponder the juxtaposition of power and fabric, remember this. The next time you feel overwhelmed by the trivialities of modern life, just think of the Byzantine drapers, the infinite debates over hem lengths, and the high stakes that came with a simple robe. They say that history is written by the victors, but perhaps it's also meticulously measured by the tailors who dared to tread where few would go. Into the depths of hem lengths, fabric costs, and the endless bureaucracy of an empire that thrived on the absurd. To think, all of this and more has been lost to time, overshadowed by grand battles and political machinations. But in the shadowy corners of history, where the light rarely shines, lie the tales of those who made it possible for emperors to strut in style, their hems perfectly aligned with the weight of their responsibilities. And that, my dear viewers, is a legacy worth pondering as you navigate the fabric of your own life. Now, let's dive deeper into the riveting world of Byzantine imperial robe hem length specifications, a topic that would make even the most fervent history buff nod off faster than you can say diaphanous silk. Picture this: vast warehouses filled with an array of fabrics, the air thick with the scent of wool, linen, and that special blend of desperation and ambition that only comes from trying to appease an emperor with a penchant for ostentation. Well, May. The Byzantine Empire, with its capital of Constantinople, was not only the crossroads of the world, but also the crossroads of fabric. It was here that imperial tailors faced the daunting task of keeping a meticulous inventory of materials, so extensive that it could rival the finest library of Alexandria, if Alexandria had been primarily concerned with the width of sleeves and the length of sleeves, hems rather than philosophical musings. Yeah. Well, imagine the role of the chief draper. Let's call him Dmitri the Diligent. Dimitri's day would begin with a morning inspection of the fabric stocks, each roll meticulously labeled with not just the type of material, but also the date of acquisition. Fei, supplier's name, which was often enough to make or break a relationship. And of course, the all-important hem length specification. Yes, each roll came with a little note that would send shivers down the spine of any fabric enthusiast, detailing the exact measurements that their fate depended upon. But about the costs, you might ask, with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for a lively discussion about the price of tripe in 14th century Rome. Well, hold on to your hats, or rather, your robes, because the costs were as complex as Byzantine politics. Fabrics ranged from the humble, everyday wool, which could be procured for a few soldi, to the extravagant silk imported from far-off lands, costing enough to make a grown tailor weep. Yes, silk was the bling of its day, and if you weren't draped in it, you might as well have been wearing a sackcloth. The procurement process was nothing short of a Byzantine bureaucratic ballet. Orders had to be placed with suppliers, and these suppliers were often located in far-off reaches of the empire, from the silk-producing regions of China to the sheep-filled pastures of Anatolia. Each time a shipment of fabric arrived, it was greeted with the pomp and circumstance usually reserved for a visiting dignitary. Inspectors would carefully unroll the fabric, checking for imperfections like a hawk eyeing its prey. A single fray could land a tailor in hot water, possibly leading to a demotion, or worse, a trip to the dungeons. No one wanted to be known as the tailor who let a hem slip. Yee. Once the material was deemed worthy of imperial robes, it was then that the real fun began. The fabric was presented to the emperor's fashion advisor, a position filled by a notoriously meticulous individual whose job was to interpret the emperor's vague and often nonsensical style requests. I want something that flows like the river Styx, but is also warm enough for a chilly evening at the hippodrome. Yes, the hippodrome, where chariot races provided plenty of entertainment for the masses and even more opportunities for emperors to flaunt their sartorial splendor. Dimitri, the advisor might say, make sure the hem is long enough to signify power, but short enough to allow for easy movement. We wouldn't want His Excellency tripping over his own robe during a public appearance, would we? This was code for please, don't embarrass me in front of the entire empire. But it didn't stop there. Following the emperor's whims, a plethora of calculations and measurements were required. Tailors had to account for the length of the robe, which varied depending on the season. Shorter for summer and longer for winter, of course. As if that weren't complicated enough, there were also guidelines on the width of the hem. A narrow hem signified modesty, while a wider hem was an ostentatious display of wealth and status. Can you imagine the endless debates that must have ensued in the dimly lit back rooms of the imperial tailor shop? What do you mean you're suggesting a hem width of 6 fingers? Are you trying to get us exiled? Once a design was finalized, the fabric was cut with a precision that would put modern-day tailors to shame. But here's where it gets truly riveting. The cutting process involved an elaborate ritual that included the consultation of sacred texts on tailoring, each detailing the appropriate length for various occasions. Gardens of the imperial palace. After the cutting came the sewing, which was both an art and a science. The hems were sewn with threads dyed in colors that were often reserved for royalty. That's right, only the best threads were used, because if you're going to flaunt your power, you might as well do it with a vibrant shade of purple that screamed, "I am the emperor, bow down before my fabric choices." And let's not forget about the endless revisions and fittings. Imagine a room filled with tailors painstakingly pinning and repinning fabric on an increasingly impatient emperor who might have just downed a feast fit for 100. No, Dimitri. This hem doesn't flow like the waves of the Bosphorus. It's got to be more majestic. The pressure was on, as the fate of the empire's style rested in the hands of these beleaguered tailors, whose only hope for survival was to get the hem length just right. Once the robe was finally completed, after what felt like an eternity of fittings, adjustments, and the occasional scandal involving mismatched threads, it was presented to the emperor in a grand ceremony. There, the emperor would don the robe for the first time, swishing it around in front of an audience, as if to demonstrate that he could indeed command attention, not only through power, but also through the sheer audacity of his hemlet. And just when you think it's over, the robe would then enter another phase of illustrious life. The inventory records had to be updated, detailing the final hem length, material used, and any notes on the emperor's reaction. Yes, even the history of the hem length was meticulously chronicled, like a sacred scripture of style. A new imperial robe, measuring precisely 2.5 cubits in length and 1.2 cubits in width at the hem, which was well received by His Majesty, but did cause an unfortunate incident involving a spilled grape. So as you sit there, perhaps a little dazed by the sheer mundanity of it all, remember, the Byzantine Empire wasn't just about emperors and battles. It was also about the endless cycle of fabric, bureaucracy, and that ever-important hem length. Because in a world where every thread mattered, those who toiled in the shadows of fashion were the true unsung heroes of history. And as you navigate your own life with its fabric of choices and decisions, consider pulling a little inspiration from the Byzantine tailors. After all, history is not just a tale of grandeur, Sometimes it's just a wonderfully boring saga of robes. Aye, yes, the marvelous world of Byzantine imperial robes, where every hem, thread, and stitch was not just a matter of aesthetics, but a complex tapestry of bureaucracy and financial oversight. If you're not already on the edge of your seat, gripped by the excitement of inventory procedures, then grab a pillow because we're diving deep into the abyss of tedium. First, let's talk about the inventory procedures. You see, keeping track of imperial robes was akin to managing a small nation unto itself, with tailor guilds, fabric suppliers, and even a few disgruntled embroiderers thrown into the mix for good measure. The Byzantine Empire produced not just clothing, but a veritable cornucopia of textiles: silk from China, wool from the hills of Anatolia, and the occasional cotton, which was quite the rarity given that cotton had not yet fully entered the Byzantine fashion lexicon.ie. Every piece of fabric had to be logged, measured, and categorized. Imagine the scene: a dimly lit chamber in the imperial palace, where a scribe, let's call him Ignatius, sits hunched over a scroll, quill in hand, surrounded by bolts of fabric. Ignatius was tasked with recording every single piece of material that entered the palace. And I mean, every single piece. The Byzantine version of an accountant, Ignatius would meticulously document the type of fabric, its color, its source, and most importantly, its cost. Did I mention that the cost of each material fluctuated more frequently than a peasant's loyalty during a coup? Yes, silk could be exorbitantly priced one day and practically given away the next, depending on the whims of trade routes and weather patterns. Now these costs were not small potatoes. A high-quality silk could set the empire back a small fortune, while a less desirable fabric, let's say something like rough-spun wool, might only cost a few coins. But here's the kicker: the choice of materials was not merely a financial decision. No, dear viewer. It was so much more. The fabric had to speak to the Emperor's Majesty, exuding power and grandeur. Or at least, that's what the fashion advisors insisted. "Sire, no one will take you seriously in wool," they would exclaim dramatically, perhaps leading to yet another round of spirited debates in the Imperial Council, over which fabric embodied the essence of divinity itself. Arinana and Hymnios, So, how did one go about determining the exact hem length for these garments? Well, that was a bureaucratic affair in its own right. Upon receiving a new bolt of fabric, a tailor would first take it to the Grand Hall of Tailoring, where a committee of esteemed tailors, often looking remarkably similar to one another, as if they had all been sewn from the same fabric, would convene. Yes, you heard that right. A committee specifically for hem lengths. I can almost hear the sound of their collective sighs as they measured the fabric, debated the merits of various lengths, and perhaps even argued over the correct method of folding the fabric before cutting it. Surely, a robe measuring 2.7 cubits is too long, and too much fabric will lead us into financial ruin, one tailor might exclaim as another counters. But what if His Majesty's dignity demands a more lavish hem? The people must see the majesty of the Emperor's toes. The classic tug-of-war between practicality and imperial grandeur. Once the hem length was decided, after a lengthy discussion, probably accompanied by the consumption of copious amounts of wine, the fabric would then be cut according to the specification. But don't be fooled. This was no simple snip-snap affair. The cutting would be overseen by the master tailor, who was the final arbiter of all things fabric-related. He had the authority to veto any decision made by the committee, and woe betide the tailor who dared to challenge his judgment. It was a position filled with tension, but also a great deal of power, much like a Byzantine senator, but with more fabric and fewer political assassinations. Now, let's pivot to that ever-important aspect: the cost of materials. Each bolt of silk had its price, and negotiating with suppliers was an art form that required not only skill, but also a touch of charm. You see, the Byzantine economy was an intricate web of trade, with local merchants and distant suppliers alike vying for imperial favor. A skilled merchant could turn a profit larger than a minor noble's annual income simply by securing a lucrative contract to supply silk to the palace. But beware, for if a merchant overcharged or delivered subpar fabric, they risk being blacklisted, a fate worse than a peasant uprising. And then there were the bureaucratic rules governing the procurement of these materials. Yes, dear viewer, there were rules. Many, many rules. The procurement process was rife with stipulations. For instance, every piece of fabric had to be accompanied by a detailed invoice, complete with the merchant's seal, before it could even be considered for use in the imperial wardrobe. This meant that every bolt of silk was scrutinized and annotated, creating a veritable labyrinth of paperwork that would make even the most seasoned modern bureaucrat weep with envy. No, imagine the poor clerk charged with validating these invoices, poring over scrolls filled with intricate calligraphy, all while trying to ensure that no rogue merchant was attempting to pull a fast one. Aye, yes, invoice number 482. This silk appears to be from the wrong province. This will never do. And so, the saga continued, with rejected invoices piling up like the refuse of a poorly attended banquet. Once the materials were deemed to be not only acceptable, but also suitable for imperial use, because let's face it, not just any silk would do. The fabric was then sent off to the tailors for construction. But even that was not the end of the saga. No. The completed robes would then be presented to the emperor for approval, and you can bet they came with a report detailing the entire process, complete with notes on hem length, material used, and any amusing anecdotes that arose during the creation of the robe. Your Majesty, this robe took precisely 6 weeks to craft, involved 3 separate trips to the fabric market, and almost caused a riot among the tailors over the color choice of imperial purple, which, as you know, is a highly coveted shade. In this emperor's world of hem lengths, fabric types, and bureaucratic red tape, one could easily lose track of the fact that we are discussing clothing. And not just any clothing, mind you, but the very robes that would adorn the most powerful ruler of the known world. It's as if history conspired to ensure that the Byzantine Empire was remembered not just for its conquests, but for its unwavering commitment to fabric precision. So, the next time you pull on a pair of sweatpants or button up a shirt, consider the Byzantine imperial robe. Think of the countless hours, the endless meetings, and the meticulous attention to detail that went into something as seemingly trivial as hem length. In the grand tapestry of history, those who navigated the convoluted world of imperial fashion were just as essential as the emperors themselves, ensuring that the legacy of the Byzantine Empire was woven not just through military might, but through the delicate threads of bureaucracy, fabric, and of course, hem lengths. So, let's delve even deeper into this fabric-laden rabbit hole and examine the Byzantine Empire's robust inventory procedures regarding imperial garments. One might think that imperial robes were simply conjured from thin air. But alas, there was a labyrinthine process involving more paperwork than a modern-day tax audit. Picture this, a vast warehouse somewhere in Constantinople, piled high with silks, brocades, and a bewildering array of colors. The inventory clerks, who, let's face it, must have had the most thrilling job description in all of history, were tasked with cataloging every single bolt of fabric. They would measure, weigh, and note down the texture of every material with the kind of precision usually reserved for fine wines or rare stamps. Each fabric type came with its own set of regulations, naturally. For instance, silk was highly prized and often imported from China, which meant it was governed by a plethora of rules regarding acceptable hem lengths. Imagine being the bureaucrat who had to determine whether a hem length of, say, 17.3 centimeters for a silk robe was too long or just right. The debates must have been riveting. Isn't 17.2 centimeters more regal? One might argue. Surely, we don't want to risk the emperor tripping over his hem while attending a banquet. And thus, the great hem length debates continued, fueled by copious amounts of wine and the fear of offending the emperor's sense of style. Oh, yeah. Now, let's talk about costs. The Byzantine treasury, already strained by military obligations and extravagant building projects like the Hagia Sophia, had to allocate a budget for these lavish robes. Each imperial robe could cost as much as a small province. And let's be honest, it wasn't just the fabric that was expensive. The labor to produce these robes involved skilled artisans who would have spent years perfecting their craft, resulting in labor costs that could rival the GDP of a small nation. And, oh, the colors. Ever heard of the term Byzantine purple? It's no mere color. It was a royal hue obtained from the murex snail, which required an astronomical number of snails to produce just a single ounce of dye. As such, this hue could cost more than gold, leading to situations where an emperor might be forced to wear a more affordable shade of red simply because the treasury had run dry on purple dye. Talk about a fashion crisis. Within the Byzantine bureaucracy, there existed a delightful structure known as the Department of Textile Affairs. Yes, dear reader, this was a real entity, and its sole purpose was the surveillance and regulation of all textile-related activities. Imagine a bunch of bureaucrats sitting around, discussing the merits of various hem lengths while sipping on mediocre wine as they gazed upon swatches of fabric. Their meetings must have been nothing short of exhilarating. They would churn through reams of scrolls detailing material sources, costs, and the ever-important material quality assurance standards. One can only assume that these standards were so stringent that even the slightest imperfection, like a rogue thread sticking out, could lead to the immediate dismissal of the chief tailor. You call this silk? This is more akin to a peasant's rag, they would exclaim, waving their arms dramatically. Thus, the world of Byzantine fashion was not for the faint-hearted or the lazy. Nei viu ken ka gendei pamcho. Nation day suo fro. As part of this bureaucratic ballet, the Department of Textile Affairs issued memos. Yes, formal memos, outlining the acceptable lengths of hems for various occasions. For instance, a hem length of 15 centimeters was perfectly acceptable for a casual Tuesday imperial audience, but for a grand ceremony, it was not uncommon for the hem length to be specified at a minimum of 20 centimeters. Heaven forbid the emperor appear in anything less than perfectly hemmed robes at a state event. Oh, but let's not forget the inspections. These were conducted with all the seriousness of a military parade. Inspectors would march into the royal tailor's workshop, armed with measuring tapes and a discerning eye. The tailors knew that one misstep could lead to dire consequences. An unhemmed robe could lead to public humiliation for the emperor. And we all know how unforgiving history can be. One slip-up could result in a tailor's strike or, worse, an uprising of robe wearers demanding better fabric standards. Now, if you think this was merely an internal affair, think again. The Byzantine Empire was known for its diplomatic relations, and clothing played a pivotal role in this arena. When a Byzantine envoy visited a foreign court, the robe he wore was not just a matter of personal taste. It was a carefully curated statement of power. The hem length had to reflect the emperor's stature, but not too ostentatiously, lest it provoke envy. So, a hem length of 22 centimeters might be standard for an envoy to the king of the Franks. while a mere 19 centimeters might suffice for a visit to the less fashion-forward court of the Bulgars. Yes. And then there were the royal weddings, where the hems were longer than the list of grievances from the common folk. These grand affairs were marred by intense scrutiny of the hem length of every single robe donned by the royal family. A 25-centimeter hem for the bride. We can't have that. It must be 30 centimeters for the royal stature. The pressure was palpable, and the tailors were sweating bullets, frantically stitching and unstitching hems to meet the demands of royal protocol. As if all of this wasn't enough, let's talk about the legacy of these hem lengths. The Byzantine Empire, despite its fall, left behind a veritable catalogue of imperial fashion that would influence styles across Europe for centuries. The hem lengths, while seemingly trivial, became a benchmark for aristocratic fashion, with noble houses vying to outdo each other in the grandiosity of their robes. So, the next time you're lounging in your pajamas or struggling with your laundry, remember the Byzantine imperial robe. Consider the intricate web of bureaucracy, the endless discussions, and most importantly, the perilous world of hem-length specifications that shape not just clothing, but an entire empire's identity. In the grand scheme of history where battles were fought and empires crumbled, let us not overlook the unsung heroes, the clerks, tailors, and aristocrats who meticulously measured hem lengths to ensure that every imperial robe was not just a garment, but a testament to the Byzantine dedication to style and precision. History may be written by those who wield swords, but it is often sewn together by those who wield needles. Nay, speaking of those unsung heroes, let's take a moment to appreciate the Byzantine clerks, the true gatekeepers of hem-length specifications. These individuals were not just scribes. They were the lords of ledger and the champions of measurements. Each day, they would arrive at the Grand Palace with the weighty responsibility of documenting every inch, every stitch, and every frayed thread of the imperial robes. Imagine a bustling office filled with parchment, ink, and the audible scratching of quills, where discussions of hem lengths could spiral into debates that would last for days, with clerks passionately arguing the merits of a half-inch versus a full inch. What excitement! Now, it's important to note that these clerks were not just measuring fabric. They were also wrestling with an elaborate system of inventory procedures that would make even the most hardened accountant weep with envy. They had to keep track of every piece of cloth that entered the imperial wardrobe. Picture it, bolts of silk, velvet, and brocade, all meticulously catalogued in dusty ledgers. Each entry required not just the type of material, but also the precise length and width, the dye lot, because heaven forbid, the emperor wear mismatched hues, and of course, the cost. And let's not forget the labor involved in weaving those materials, which, by the way, was no small feat. Byzantine tailors were artisans in their own right, working with the finest threads, and often employing techniques so intricate that they could have been mistaken for medieval sorcery. The cost of materials fluctuated dramatically, much like the stock market today, but with significantly less glamour and a lot more goat hair. The clerks had to stay on top of these costs, ensuring that the imperial treasury was not drained by extravagant spending on hem lengths. A half-a-stitch deviation on documentation could lead to fiscal chaos. Picture the clerks, sweating bullets, anxiously counting and recounting every last drachma, as they tried to explain to an irate emperor why the hem of his new ceremonial robe cost more than his last 3 campaigns combined. Bureaucracy at its finest. Oh, and did I mention the endless rules and regulations governing fabric use? Byzantine fashion was steeped in a convoluted hierarchy that dictated not just the length of a hem, but also the fabric's color and texture based on rank and status. Yes, you heard that right. It was more than just looking fabulous. It was about adhering to the Byzantine code of fashion. A senator's robe, for instance, had to be a specific length to ensure it hit just above the ankle, while the emperor's robe trailed dramatically behind him, a flowing cascade of luxurious fabric that both signified power and ensured that he would trip over it. At the most inopportune moments, talk about dramatic flair. The clerks would also have to keep a close watch on which noble houses were vying for supremacy in this sartorial arena. Nobles would often attempt to outshine one another by commissioning robes with increasingly elaborate hems. This led to a wild fashion arms race, where one noble would show up to a banquet with an embroidered hem that sparkled like the night sky, only for another to respond with a gilded hem that could blind a mere mortal. I can only imagine the clerks' horror as they logged the new lengths, wondering just how far this hem-length rivalry would go. Would they soon be measuring hems in yards? Would they have to hire an additional clerk just to keep up with the extravagant lengths? The suspense was palpable. As for the material costs, let's dive deeper into the fabric of their reality. Pun absolutely intended. Silk was the crown jewel in the Byzantine wardrobe, sourced from the far reaches of the East, where it was spun by industrious silkworms that were blissfully unaware of their pivotal role in fashion diplomacy. The clerks would have to account for transportation costs, tariffs, and the occasional bribe needed to secure the finest bolts. And let's not even discuss the dreaded silk shortage, which would send ripples of panic through the imperial wardrobe. Imagine the clerks' frantic scribbling as they balanced their ledgers, desperate to find an alternate source of fabric that wouldn't end in scandal or a royal tantrum. Meanwhile, the tailors were busy behind the scenes, creating exquisite patterns, laying them out on fabric, and cutting them with precision worthy of a surgeon. The process was painstaking, with each hem being measured repeatedly to avoid any catastrophic faux pas. One wrong snip could lead to a robe that was too short, and we all know that a short hem could mean the end of a noble's career, not to mention the social embarrassment at the next grand feast. Picture a tailor holding back tears as he faced the wrath of a noble demanding a robe that could practically float through the air with elegance. And let's talk about the religious implications of hem lengths. Yes, even in fashion, the church had a say. The Byzantine Empire was deeply intertwined with the Orthodox Church, and clergy members had their own rules regarding vestments. Robes worn by priests had specific length requirements that were often dictated by local bishops, who would remind the tailors that a hem too short could lead to spiritual repercussions. The clerks would have to navigate this minefield of ecclesiastical fashion guidelines, ensuring that the imperial wardrobe adhered to both imperial and divine decrees. A clerical robe that straddled the line between holy and haute couture was a delicate balance, and no one wanted to be the clerk who mismeasured and inadvertently summoned a theological crisis. And then there were the ceremonial occasions. Those glorious days when the Byzantine Empire would host festivals, parades, and imperial receptions. The tailors had to prepare for these with meticulous planning, ensuring that the length of the hem was perfect for the occasion. Imagine the chaos in the wardrobe as tailors scrambled to finish the emperor's new ceremonial robe just hours before a grand event, only to discover that the hem was an inch too long. The clerks would be called in to double-check their measurements, and you could practically hear the collective gasp as they realized that the emperor might not be able to walk through the city without dragging his robe behind him like a royal train of Ophra, and his robe behind him like a royal train of Fani. Embarrassment. Now, we can't forget the impact of hem lengths on the common populace. The Byzantine Empire was known for its social stratification, and the styles of the aristocracy would trickle down to the lower classes, eventually. The common folk would look on in awe, and perhaps mild jealousy, as the noble class paraded their meticulously crafted robes through the streets. And while they may not have had access to the same lavish materials, they certainly took inspiration from the hem lengths, resulting in a veritable fashion revolution among the peasantry. Who knew that the length of a hem could inspire such envy and creativity among the lower classes? Each hem length became a story, a tale passed down through generations, and a source of inspiration for poets and playwrights alike. The legacy of those Byzantine clerks, tailors, and clerics lives on in the annals of history, an absurdly detailed tapestry woven from the threads of bureaucracy and imperial grandeur. Next time you find yourself in a clothing store, remember the Byzantine imperial robe and the long, tedious legacy of hem. It wasn't just fashion, it was a way of life, a testament to the empire's commitment to precision and style, and a reminder that sometimes the most mundane details can have the loudest echoes through time. So, wear your clothing proudly, for somewhere in history, a Byzantine clerk is smiling at the legacy of their meticulous work. Yeah. As we delve deeper into the seemingly endless quagmire of Byzantine imperial robe hem length specifications, one cannot help but marvel at the labyrinthine bureaucracy that surrounded the creation, maintenance, and regulation of these garments. Picture, if you will, the grand imperial court of Byzantium, where every flicker of a silk hem could spark a debate that would echo through marble halls for days, if not weeks. The sheer complexity of the inventory procedures alone could make even the most seasoned historian's head spin in disbelief. First, let's talk about the inventory procedures. You see, in the Byzantine Empire, nothing was ever as simple as merely measuring a hem and moving on with life. Oh no, my friend. The process was akin to a full-blown military operation, complete with ranks, hierarchies, and enough paperwork to fill the entire library of Alexandria. If it had survived and was filled with forms, that is. Every time a new batch of imperial robes was commissioned, it would trigger a veritable cascade of bureaucratic activity. First, the emperor's tailors, who, let me remind you, were not just simple seamstresses, but rather skilled artisans who had likely spent decades perfecting their craft, would draft a request for the necessary materials. This request would then be sent to the Ministry of Cloth, a department so vast it made the Department of Labor look like a two-person operation run out of a garage. The Ministry of Cloth was responsible for sourcing the finest silks, brocades, and occasionally the odd piece of wool for the more rustic imperial events, though the latter was mostly reserved for the emperor's annual. Let's pretend we're still relatable. But sourcing materials was only the beginning. Once the fabric was procured, it had to be catalogued according to the Byzantine system of classification, which, for all intents and purposes, resembled a cross between a medieval tax code and a highly complicated game of chess. Each piece of fabric was assigned a code based on its color, texture, thread count, and how likely it was to get caught in the imperial chariot wheels. Because let's face it, fashion faux pas were the least of the emperor's worries when he had to dodge the emperor's worries when he had to dodge. Occasional pothole in the streets of Constantinople. Now, let's say you were a tailor working under the jurisdiction of the emperor's fashion department. You'd receive your assignment along with a meticulously detailed schematic, including, not to be forgotten, the precise hem length of the robe. In this case, we might be looking at a hem length of, say, 1.5 Byzantine cubits, which sounds delightfully ancient and whimsical, but is actually a measurement fraught with its own complications. You see, a Byzantine cubit varied significantly depending on which local magistrate had been entrusted with the measuring stick that day. One can only imagine the bureaucratic infighting that ensued when a tailor's hem length was declared too short by one magistrate, only for another to declare it perfectly acceptable the following week. This type of inconsistency could lead to fashion crises of epic proportions, with tailors being dragged into court to defend their work against accusations of hem treason. And let's not forget about the costs associated with these opulent garments. Each imperial robe was not just a simple outfit. It was a financial investment on par with a small ship. The procurement costs for luxurious fabrics were substantial, often leading to debates among the emperor's advisors about whether a hem length of 1.5 cubits was truly worth the price of an entire harvest of olives. Would it not be more prudent, they pondered, to invest in something of greater utility, like a fleet of warships or, say, a new aqueduct system? Alas, the sartorial needs of an empire weighed heavily on the minds of its leaders, and time and again the call of fashion triumphed over fiscal prudence. Wouldn't say, in a world where the hem length could mean the difference between being hailed as the epitome of imperial splendor or ridiculed as a fashion faux pas, one would think that the Byzantine tailors would be afforded some creative freedom. However, the reality was far more draconian. There were strict codes governing not only the length but also the width, the flare, and even the number of embellishments permissible on the hem. Gold embroidery, for instance, was reserved for special occasions, like when the emperor had just conquered a neighboring province or had successfully avoided a particularly vexing bout of plague. For everyday wear, a simple silk thread was considered more than adequate, but one could not be too careful. A misstep in the realm of imperial fashion could lead to social ostracization, or worse, a demotion in the Tailors' Guild. And, wishy. Speaking of guilds, the Byzantine Empire had its fair share of them, each with its own set of rules and regulations. The Tailors' Guild was among the most prestigious, with members often boasting about their lineage tracing back to the original court tailors of Justinian I. Membership in this guild was akin to being part of an elite brotherhood, where knowledge of hem-length specifications was passed down like a sacred text. Apprentices began their training at a young age, often spending years simply learning how to calculate the perfect hem length based on the wearer's height, social status, and the current fashion trends. Yes, there were fashion trends even in the Byzantine Empire, though they were perhaps less about what was in and more about what was imperially sanctioned. Imagine the angst of a young apprentice who, upon measuring the hem for a robe destined for a mid-level bureaucrat, accidentally cut it 1/8 of a cubit too short. The scandal. The potential for being sent to the far reaches of the empire to tailor garments for the unwashed masses. It's enough to make one shudder at the thought. As if all of this weren't enough, we must also consider the inspections. Yes, inspections. Each robe, once completed, would undergo a rigorous review process, where high-ranking officials, often with little to no fashion sense, would scrutinize every inch of the garment. They would measure the hem length with something akin to a divining rod, muttering about imperial standards and the divine right of hem lengths, as they painstakingly checked for compliance. If the hem was found lacking, it was back to the drawing board for the tailor, because nothing says imperial dignity quite like a last-minute hem adjustment. No soul, And so, the saga of Byzantine imperial robe hem lengths continues, unfurling like the very fabric of the garments under scrutiny. A tale of meticulous record-keeping, the pushing and pulling of bureaucratic red tape, and the unyielding pressure of fashion trends that even the mightiest emperor could not escape. It is a story not just about clothing, but about the lengths to which a society will go to maintain its grandeur, even if it is only a matter of mere inches. The legacy of these hem lengths lives on, reminding us that in the grand tapestry of history, it is often the most mundane details that weave the most compelling narratives. So, next time you find yourself adjusting your own hem, take a moment to reflect on the Byzantine clerks and tailors whose lives were spent in the pursuit of sartorial perfection. They may not have made headlines, but their legacy is stitched into the very fabric of history, one hem length at a time. But dear viewers, we cannot merely glide past the minutiae of Byzantine imperial robe hem length specifications without delving deeper into the intricate web of inventory procedures that govern the very fabric of imperial fashion. Picture yourself, if you will, in the dusty archives of a Byzantine tailoring guild, surrounded by scrolls and ledgers, those glorious relics of bureaucracy, where every inch of fabric was tracked with the same fervor as a tax collector hunting down a clever evader. The Byzantine Empire was nothing if not meticulous, and this extends to how they handled their robes, which were, let's say, more than a mere garment. They were symbols of divine right and imperial power, not to mention the cause of many a sleepless night for tailors. As we flip through the voluminous records, we find ourselves engrossed in the Byzantine inventory procedures that detailed the acquisition, maintenance, and distribution of robe materials. The fabric choices were as varied as the political factions vying for power: silk, wool, and linen, each with its own set of cost considerations and quality assessments. The silk, sourced primarily from the famed Silk Road, this luxurious material was not merely an expense. It was an investment in the visual splendor of the empire. A single bolt of silk could cost as much as a small village, and the price fluctuations often led to heated debates in the imperial court. One can only imagine the drama. "Your Majesty, do we truly need to spend 200 gold coins on a hem? What of the people?" To which the emperor would likely respond, "Yes, but how will I maintain my majesty without my hem being precisely 10 inches from the floor?" But fret not, dear viewers, for the Byzantine Empire was ready for such squabbles. Enter the esteemed Bureau of Imperial Robe Specifications, a hallowed institution where no detail was too trivial to escape scrutiny. Their official protocols dictated not only the desired hem lengths, but also the specific fabric widths. Yes, width. A scandalous deviation of just a half-inch could shake the very foundations of the empire, causing whispers in the court and causing the Senate to question the emperor's sense of style. The bureau had an inventory clerk, let's call him Nicetas, whose job was to oversee the precise measurement of fabric. Nicetas would meticulously record each bolt, noting the fiber content, color, and of course its approved hem length. One wonders how many times he dreamed of a life beyond the ledger, perhaps in a vineyard, sipping wine rather than measuring fabric. Alas, duty called. And let's talk about the costs associated with these materials. Byzantine fashion was not just a matter of taste, it was a complex economic machine. The price of silk could fluctuate drastically based on geopolitical events, such as wars or the occasional scandal involving a rogue emissary. Imagine the panic that ensued when a shipment of fine silk arrived from China, but was delayed due to a pesky Mongol invasion. Suddenly, the imperial robe was not just a fashion statement, it was a race against time. The cost of silk would skyrocket, and tailors found themselves in a frenzy, scrambling to make last-minute adjustments to ensure that the emperor still looked magnificent at the next public appearance. Not that anyone ever noticed a hem-length discrepancy in the heat of the moment, but still, then came the bureaucratic rules that governed hem adjustments. Yes, that's right. There was an entire set of regulations dictating how and when tailors could adjust hems. These rules were put in place to ensure that no robe deviated from the imperial standard, which was, of course, set by the Bureau of Imperial Robe Specifications. Tailors were required to submit a formal request for hem adjustments, including the reasoning behind their request. "Oh, dear Emperor, I must adjust the hem to prevent tripping hazards during your forthcoming address." The paperwork could take weeks, and by the time it was approved, the emperor might have decided to wear an altogether different robe, rendering the entire process moot. Yet, the clerks pressed on, their quills scratching out the minutiae of fabric adjustments, like it was a matter of life and death. The tailors, bless their souls, had to navigate this bureaucratic minefield with the finesse of a diplomat. They were expected to create flawless garments, perfectly aligned with the imperial specifications, while also adhering to the whims of the ruling class. Imagine trying to convince a tailor to embrace the concept of slightly longer or just a tad shorter when their whole existence revolved around precision. The concept of close enough was utterly foreign to them. No one wanted to be the tailor blamed for causing a scandal due to a hem that was a mere quarter-inch off. And as if that weren't enough, there was also the matter of the fabric's life cycle. Once a robe was crafted, it didn't simply live on its own. It had to be maintained, cleaned, and occasionally refurbished. The Byzantine Empire had an entire department dedicated to the upkeep of these garments, known as the Department of Imperial Garment Preservation. This group was responsible for keeping the robes in pristine condition, which included regular inspections, pest control. Imagine the horror of moths feasting on royal fabric, and cleaning rituals that made modern dry cleaning look like a casual Saturday afternoon. One particularly entertaining aspect of this department was their obsession with fabric longevity. Robes that showed signs of wear would be subjected to an extensive set of tests: color fastness, tear resistance, and even a smell test. Yes, you heard that right. Nicetas from the Bureau of Imperial Robe Specifications had to go through lengths to determine if a robe still passed the royal olfactory standards. Heaven forbid the emperor stepped out in a robe that had the faintest whiff of stale sweat from a previous ceremony. Then, of course, there were the tailors themselves, an often overlooked yet essential part of this grand fabric enterprise. These artisans were expected to not only create the robes, but also to keep abreast of the latest trends in hem length specifications. Can you imagine the gossip that would circulate at the local tavern? Did you hear? The emperor is experimenting with a new hem length, 2.5 inches instead of the customary 3. Sacrilege. The tailors had to maintain an immaculate reputation, for their livelihoods depended on the emperor's favor. A bad hem could lead to ostracism, and no one wanted to be known as the tailor who couldn't keep the emperor looking regal. And let us not forget the numerous royal decrees regarding robe lengths that emerged from all this. Every now and then, an emperor, perhaps feeling particularly whimsical or just a little bored, might issue a decree changing the hem length specifications entirely. From this day forth, all imperial robes must have hems that touch the ground, said one particularly extravagant emperor, not thinking through the practical implications of dragging fabric through the mud. The furor that followed such announcements was both entertaining and tragic. Tailors scrambled to comply, frantic to adjust the hems in time for the next public appearance, while inventory clerks like Nicetas had to double-check every inch to ensure compliance. The entire empire could grind to a halt as tailors measured, adjusted, and argued over the correct hem length, while the emperor lounged comfortably in his gilded chambers, blissfully unaware of the chaos his whims had unleashed. As we examine this intricate tapestry of Byzantine imperial robe hem length specifications, it becomes clear that we are not merely talking about lengths of fabric or mundane inventory processes. We are diving into a world where every stitch told a story. Every hem length adjustment could alter the fate of an empire, and where the legacy of those dedicated clerks and tailors lives on, lurking in the shadows of history. So next time you find yourself contemplating your own wardrobe choices, remember the Byzantine Empire, a realm where the empire's might was measured not just in military conquests, but in the splendid, precisely measured hem of an imperial robe. But dear viewer, the plot thickens like a well-aged porridge as we peel back the layers of Byzantine bureaucracy. You see, this was not merely a matter of choosing the right fabric or the latest color trend. Oh, no, not in the Byzantine Empire. This was a full-fledged adventure in the realm of inventory procedures, where the slightest miscalculation could mean the difference between a glorious coronation and an embarrassing wardrobe malfunction. Let us take a moment to appreciate the Byzantine inventory clerks, those unsung heroes of the empire, who wielded their measuring tapes like swords in battle. Nicetas, our favorite clerk, would meticulously document every single piece of fabric, sometimes even going so far as to record the precise number of threads per inch. Yes, you heard that right. If there was a discrepancy, even as minute as a single thread more or less, it could trigger a bureaucratic avalanche that would leave the palace staff scrambling to rectify the situation. How could we possibly present the Emperor in an ill-fitting robe? They might wail, clutching their scrolls as if they held the very fate of the Empire in their hands, because, in many ways, they did. I know. The material costs of these robes were enough to make even the most seasoned accountant weep. The Byzantine silk, known as bursa, was reputed to be of such high quality that it was worth its weight in gold. Literally. The procurement of this luxurious fabric was a saga in itself. Merchants would journey far and wide, navigating treacherous trade routes, while negotiating prices with the kind of fervor usually reserved for political treaties. The Byzantine treasury had to allocate funds with precision, ensuring they could afford the finest silks without bankrupting the empire. So when Nicetas logged a shipment of royal purple fabric, which was, of course, reserved exclusively for the emperor, he did so with a heavy heart, knowing that the delicate balance of imperial finances hung in the balance. No. But wait, it doesn't end there. Once the materials were procured, the clerks would then engage in the thrilling process of item categorization. You see, every bolt of fabric was assigned a meticulous code that could rival even the most sophisticated modern barcode systems. The codes designated the fabric type, color, approved hem length, and even the date of acquisition, all documented in a series of ledgers that would make a librarian swoon with envy. For example, Bursa 301 Imperial Purple Hem, 18 inches add 562, was a typical entry. It was more than a mere label. It was a testament to the Empire's commitment to precision and order. Nay. And here's the kicker. These records were often cross-referenced with other documents, including royal decrees, tailors' contracts, and even imperial edicts regulating the use of specific colors and fabrics, based on the social standing of the wearer. Imagine the unfortunate tailor who mistakenly used an imperial purple fabric for a mere nobleman. That poor soul would find themselves on the wrong end of an imperial decree, possibly faced with a fine or, even worse, a lifetime ban from engaging in the delicate art of robe making. Now, let's turn our eyes toward the tailors themselves, the fabric-wielding artisans who were, arguably, the most stressed-out individuals in the entire empire. These skilled craftsmen had to not only follow the hem length specifications, but also accommodate various whims of the emperor, who could change his mind about the exact shade of gold thread embroidery at a moment's notice. I want more gold. The emperor might declare one day, only to demand a subdued elegance the next. The tailors, bless them, had to remain perpetually on call, armed with needles and thread, prepared to cater to the next imperial fancy. And speaking of whims, we must not forget the all-important approval process. Can you imagine the tension in the air as the finished robe was presented to the emperor for his royal inspection? It was a moment fraught with peril. One stray thread, one uneven hem, and the tailor's career could be hanging by a thread, quite literally. The emperor, reclining upon his throne, would gaze upon the garment, his discerning eye searching for imperfections. "Is this hem length exactly 18 inches?" he would demand. And the tailor would hold their breath, remembering the frantic measurements and the endless scrolls of Nicetas' notes. Or, should the robe pass inspection, the tailor would breathe a sigh of relief, but the journey was far from over. Next came the ceremonial presentation of the robe to the treasury for record-keeping. Yes, yet another round of meticulous documentation. The treasury clerks, with quills poised, would inscribe their own entries, noting the robe's final measurements, the exact date of approval, and the tailor's name, ensuring all parties were credited and accountable. It was a bureaucratic ballet, a grand waltz of paperwork that could churn on for hours, if not days. But what would happen if the Emperor decided to throw a surprise public appearance? In that case, the Empire would be thrown into chaos. The tailors would be summoned with frantic urgency, fabric bolts pulled from shelves, and hem lengths remeasured on the spot. "We need a new robe, and we need it now," would echo through the halls of the palace. It was an entirely different level of stress, akin to preparing for a royal wedding on a whim. As Nicetas would furiously scribble down the newest requisition, one could almost hear the thread snapping in the distance. Once the robe was completed, it would be ceremoniously packaged, adorned with ribbons and seals, and sent off to the imperial dressing chambers. But wait, not so fast. The imperial robe would also need to be checked for compliance with yet another set of regulations, those governing the ceremonial presentation of the emperor to his subjects. Yes, even the manner of presenting the robe was governed by a thick tome of protocols. Ensure you hold the robe at exactly waist height for maximum visibility, a courtier might instruct, while another would chime in with, "But don't forget to angle it slightly to the left to catch the sunlight." All the while the emperor would sit, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside his chamber, possibly pondering lunch options or the latest gossip circulating through the court. It was a wonder how anyone could possibly maintain a healthy mental state amid such a whirlwind of detail and drama. And let us not forget the entire process of preserving these ornate garments. After a royal event, the robes were carefully removed, folded in a precise manner, and stored in specialized conditions to prevent any fabric deterioration. The Byzantine attention to detail extended into the realm of preservation, with tailors and clerks alike making notes on how best to care for each fabric type. Silk must be kept away from light to prevent fading, Nicetas would document, while a tailor would nod vigorously, likely already contemplating the elaborate storage solutions that would need to be implemented. The thought of an imperial robe fading into a mere shadow of its former glory was enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone involved in the process. As we traverse this ocean of bureaucratic minutiae, it becomes astonishingly clear how the Byzantine Empire, with its regal attire and obsession with hem lengths, wove a complicated web of necessity and chaos. From the depths of the treasury, where funds were meticulously allocated, to the dizzying heights of the imperial throne room, where every inch mattered, the saga of the imperial robe hem-length specifications is a testament to how even the most trivial details can echo through history, shaping the very fabric of civilization, quite literally in this case. So, the next time you debate about the length of your own attire or perhaps wrangle with your tailor, remember the Byzantine clerks, tailors, and emperors who turned the mundane into the monumental with every hem they measured. Well, wow, why? As we peer deeper into this fabric-laden abyss, we can't help but appreciate the Byzantine Empire's almost obsessive attention to detail, particularly when it came to its imperial wardrobe. The hem lengths of these opulent robes weren't merely a matter of aesthetic preference. They were wrapped in a convoluted network of bureaucratic procedures that would make a modern-day tax audit look like a relaxing spa day. To start, we must consider the Byzantine inventory system, a marvel of inefficiency that would make any contemporary inventory manager weep. Imagine rows upon rows of scrolls, meticulously cataloging every piece of fabric and thread that passed through the imperial wardrobe department. These scrolls didn't just list the materials, they detailed the exact origins of each bolt of silk, the dye used, and of course the hem lengths deemed acceptable by the latest imperial edict. Yes, there were edicts for hem lengths, and they came with the kind of gravitas typically reserved for declarations of war or the appointment of a new patriarch. Oh, the inventory procedures were so elaborate that a single bolt of silk could undergo more scrutiny than a Byzantine general preparing for battle. Clerks, presumably wearing robes of their own, would gather in dimly lit rooms, poring over parchments and debating the merits of various textiles. One can only imagine the intense discussions that revolved around the merits of a 12-inch hem versus a 10-inch one. Would it sway elegantly during the ceremonial processions, or would it risk tripping the emperor on the grand stage of public life? Such choices were not made lightly, and they were often accompanied by copious notes and even more copious cups of wine. Speaking of wine, we must also touch upon the costs associated with these luxury fabrics. Silk, being the fabric of choice for the Byzantine elite, came with a hefty price tag. Sourced primarily from the far reaches of the Silk Road, this sumptuous material was worth its weight in gold, or at least a pile of Byzantine coins. The financial records are a veritable goldmine of tedium, detailing expenditures on textiles that would make even the most seasoned accountant's eyes glaze over. A single imperial robe could cost the equivalent of a small village's annual income, leading to endless debates in the Senate regarding the appropriateness of such lavish spending. Should we invest in the military or in another robe for the emperor was undoubtedly a common conundrum. And what of the materials themselves? The hem lengths weren't just a matter of silk. They were a careful balancing act between various adornments and linings that could influence the total length. A simple hem could quickly transform into a complex arrangement of layers, interwoven with gold threads, precious stones, and even the occasional rare feather. Each addition had to be meticulously recorded, for nothing said we are a civilization that has its priorities straight quite like a robe adorned with the rarest of materials. The added weight of such embellishments, however, led to yet another concern: the structural integrity of the hem. Too many adornments could lead to a droop, an unthinkable faux pas in the world of Byzantine fashion. Paradiscendi, and use as the bureaucracy around hem specifications extended into a labyrinth of regulations. There were official guidelines that dictated the precise measurements, approved by a council of fashion experts who undoubtedly took themselves far too serious. The Council of Hem Length Regulation, which sounds like a group of protagonists in some forgotten comedic play, was tasked with ensuring that the emperor appeared regal without inadvertently resembling a walking fabric store. Their meetings were likely filled with heated debates over the minutiae fabric draping, and woe betide the council member who suggested an unapproved length. As the empire evolved, so too did the hem specifications. A trending hem length, perhaps a sharp 9 inches in the year 500 AD, could quickly devolve into a scandalous 14 inches by the time the emperor donned his robe for the next public appearance. And what would that mean for the tailors? They would need to scramble, recalibrating their measuring tapes and adjusting their cutting lists. A sudden change in fashion could lead to a wave of fabric waste, which could weigh heavily on the conscience of any self-respecting tailor. Heaven forbid an emperor be caught wearing a robe that was last season's style. A predicament that could result in a loss of favor, and possibly a demotion to the dreaded position of imperial shoe cleaner. The tailors themselves were not merely artisans. They were also the gatekeepers of imperial dignity. Each stitch was imbued with an expectation of perfection. They were required to master an array of techniques that extended beyond mere sewing. Some were tasked with the art of embroidery, creating intricate designs that would further complicate the hem length calculations. After all, a simple hem was far too pedestrian for an emperor, and every additional embellishment risked altering the overall length and drape. One can only imagine the panic that ensued upon the arrival of the imperial emissaries, who would come to inspect the robes. "Is that a quarter of an inch too long?" they would exclaim, their faces pale with dread. The tailors, knowing full well the weight of their responsibilities, would likely be seen frantically stitching and measuring, hoping against hope that they could avoid the wrath of the imperial court. A poorly hemmed robe could lead to political ramifications that would reverberate throughout the empire. After all, what could be more scandalous than an emperor whose robe did not meet the stringent standards set forth by the council? There's also the matter of the hem's interaction with accessories. The Byzantine emperors were not only rulers, they were also fashion icons, carrying an array of accessories that could draw attention to their robes. Capes, sashes, and belts all played a role in that delicate dance of style, where the hem lengths could either complement or clash with the emperor's entire ensemble. The harmony between hem length and accessories was so pivotal that fashionistas of the era would debate such pairings at great length over lavish banquets, possibly while feasting on roasted peacock and figs, an indulgence that certainly added another layer of complexity to the dining experience. In short, the Byzantine imperial robe hem-length specifications were far more than a simple measurement. They were a reflection of the empire's values, aspirations, and sometimes its absurdities. So, the next time you find yourself hemmed in by life's little details, take solace in the knowledge that history is rife with instances where the mundane became monumental, and where the hem lengths of imperial robes dictated the very fate of an empire. After all, in the grand tapestry of history, every inch counts. Now, as we delve deeper into the Byzantine fashion world, it becomes abundantly clear that the hem length of imperial robes was not merely a matter of aesthetics. It was steeped in an intricate web of bureaucratic procedures, material costs, and the sort of endless inventory management that would make even the most stalwart accountant weep with envy. Imagine, if you will, the Byzantine Imperial Wardrobe Department, a veritable beehive of activity, where tailors, clerks, and advisors scurried about, armed with scrolls and quills, measuring tapes and the occasional bolt of sumptuous fabric. First, let's address the crucial aspect of inventory management. The Byzantine Empire was nothing if not organized, and their approach to robe production was akin to a modern supply chain, albeit with slightly more incense and a lot less efficiency. Every robe, from the most extravagant imperial regalia to the humble tunics of the lesser nobility, had to be meticulously cataloged. This sacred inventory was recorded in elaborate ledgers, written in a stylized script that only a handful of scribes could decipher, a mystery worthy of the Da Vinci Code. Every time a new robe was commissioned, the process kicked off with a request that would travel through layers of bureaucracy. This request was often accompanied by an application filled with just the right amount of pomp and circumstance. You couldn't just waltz up to the emperor and ask for a new robe. No, that would be far too pedestrian. Instead, you had to draft a detailed proposal, including the desired hem length, fabric type, and even the number of times the emperor had worn the previous robe, because clearly no one wants to be caught in a repeat. These proposals would then be circulated among the imperial advisors for approval. Yes, folks, we're talking about a Byzantine version of a fashion council, complete with probably the same level of backstabbing and intrigue as a real housewives' reunion. Once a hem length was approved, it was time to procure the materials. The costs of fabric were as varied as the opinions on what shade of purple best suited a ruler. Silk, naturally, was the fabric of choice for the elite, but not just any silk. We're talking about the finest threads from the mulberry trees of China. Those would set you back a pretty denarius. Then there were the dyes, sourced from snails, plants, and the occasional crushed beetle, all meticulously selected to ensure the emperor's ensemble conveyed not just power, but also a certain je ne sais quoi. Now, Let's not forget about the labor involved. Skilled artisans, often operating under the watchful eye of a foreman who had probably seen more hem lengths than he cared to remember, were responsible for crafting these garments. Each robe was a labor of love, or perhaps a labor of compliance, as the artisans knew that straying from the hem specifications could lead to dire consequences. Imagine being summoned before the emperor for a robe that fell just an inch short of the expected length. The horror! As the fabric was cut and sewn, the artisans had to keep a watchful eye on the hem. Maintaining precision was crucial, as even the slightest deviation could result in a wardrobe malfunction of epic proportions. You see, in Byzantine culture, a hem that was deemed too short could signal weakness, while one that was excessively long could evoke images of sloth. It was truly a fine line, and one that tailors treaded with the utmost care, often invoking the gods of fashion to guide their scissors. And then, of course, there were the bureaucratic regulations that governed every aspect of hem length specifications. The Codex Justinianus, the legal foundation of Byzantine law, contained numerous mandates regarding imperial attire, down to the very specifics of how long a hem could hang. For instance, a decree might read something like, "Let no robe exceed the length of the imperial staff by more than 2 fingers." Imagine the deliberation that must have gone into crafting such laws. Teams of legal scholars, likely engaged in heated debates over whether to measure using the emperor's fingers or the average peasant's. What a delightful waste of time. This is on pin now. So, as the hem lengths were negotiated, the costs outlined, and the artisans worked tirelessly, the very fabric of Byzantine society was woven with these seemingly mundane details. But wait, there's more. The robes themselves served not just as garments, but as potent symbols of authority and status. The emperor, draped in the most exquisitely tailored robe, stood as a beacon of power, his hem length a direct representation of his reign. It was said that the longer the hem, the more benevolent the ruler. A theory that, if true, would suggest that emperors were constantly tripping over themselves in an effort to show off their goodwill. Let's not forget the most critical aspect of all, the ceremonial presentation of the robes. Once completed, every new imperial robe was presented to the emperor in a grand ceremony that could rival the opening of an Olympic Games. The tailors would gather in the imperial hall, presenting the robe with all the flair of a magician revealing his greatest trick. "Behold, my liege! The hem length has been measured, scrutinized, and blessed by the most esteemed tailors in the empire." The emperor, probably half asleep, would nod approvingly, as if the fate of the empire rested solely on his approval of the hem length. And of course, the presentation would be followed by a thorough inspection. The emperor would stand there, draped in his new garment, while a committee of fashion experts examined every inch of the hem. A ruler's reputation rested on these moments, and you can imagine the tension in the air as one particularly sharp-eyed advisor squinted at the hem, ready to pounce on any disparity. "Excuse me, Your Excellency, but I believe the hem is a mere half-inch off the standard length," they might declare, watching in glee as the emperor's face turned various shades of crimson. Wow! As if that weren't enough, there were also the fashion trends that ebbed and flowed through the empire like the tides. One year, the hem might be all the rage at ankle length, while the next season, it could be all about floor-sweeping extravagance. These trends could spark the kind of fervor that led to uprisings, or at the very least heated discussions in the marketplace. Fashion, it seemed, was a matter not only of personal expression but also of political significance. Oh, but let's not forget the economic implications of these hem specifications. As the Byzantine Empire expanded, so too did the demand for fine fabrics and skilled artisans. Trade routes flourished as merchants scurried about, bringing in luxurious materials and sending out heavily hemmed robes to newly appointed governors and local dignitaries. The demand became so significant that the empire even implemented strict regulations on who could wear certain lengths and what materials were permissible. It was a veritable fashion police of sorts, ensuring that no one was caught wearing a hem that suggested they were nobility when they were, in fact, mere commoners. Now, and as we ponder the absurdity of it all, let's take a moment to appreciate how these seemingly trivial details of hem length specifications were intricately woven into the very fabric of Byzantine life. The next time you find yourself debating whether to go for the ankle length or the mid-calf hem, remember that there was a time when emperor's very rule depended on such choices. So let us raise a glass, preferably filled with the vintage wine from the imperial cellars, to the unsung heroes of Byzantine fashion, those diligent tailors and bureaucrats who ensured that every hem was just right, for in the world of imperial robes, every inch truly did count. Now, if we delve deeper into the Byzantine bureaucracy surrounding these hem length specifications, and believe me, there's a bottomless pit of mundanity to explore, we arrive at the mesmerizing world of inventory procedures. Yes, friends, while the empire stood as a bastion of culture and military might, it also housed a labyrinthine system that would make any modern-day accountant weep with joy, or perhaps despair, depending on their affinity for tedium. In every major city, there existed a cadre of clerks whose sole purpose in life was to catalog the imperial robes, down to the very last. Picture it. Rows of dusty scrolls filled with meticulous records detailing the fabric's provenance, the precise lengths of hems, and even the color gradients of the silk used. Yes, the Byzantine clerks had it all figured out. Heaven forbid someone should misreport the length of a hem. The ramifications would be catastrophic. Imagine a senator strutting around in a hem that was a mere millimeter too short. Utter chaos would ensue. These clerks, with their ink-stained fingers and obsessive tendencies, were armed with a terrifyingly extensive lexicon of terms. They had phrases reserved for every conceivable hem length, from knee grazing to so long it could trip a horse. Each term came with a specific meaning and a corresponding set of regulations. For instance, a hem classified as floor sweeping was only permissible for those of considerable rank and wealth. If a mere merchant was caught in such lavish attire, the consequences could range from public ridicule to a delightful chat with the local magistrate, a fate worse than death in Byzantine society. To ensure compliance with these stringent regulations, each department of the imperial wardrobe was required to conduct regular audits. Yes, that's right, audits. Imagine the thrill of a team of bureaucrats arriving to inspect not just the lengths of hems, but also the fabric quality, which was often graded on a scale that could only be described as absurdly granular. Was the silk imported from the finest sources in China, or was it just a cheap knockoff? Did the fabric shimmer in the proper light, or did it look like the leftover curtains from last season's fashion line? Each robe was scrutinized, and if a hem fell short of expectations, the entire garment would be condemned to a life of drudgery in some forgotten corner of the imperial storehouse, gathering dust and lamenting its lost glory. Nay, einen. But we mustn't forget about the cost of these materials. The Byzantine Empire was not just a political and military powerhouse. It was also a mercantile hub, trading in silks, spices, and other luxuries. The price of silk fluctuated like the whims of the emperor himself. One week, a sumptuous bolt of silk might cost the equivalent of a small fortune, while the next it could be as cheap as a cup of stale wine. You see, the Byzantine economy was a chaotic dance of supply and demand, and the tailors had to be both shrewd and patient, waiting for the optimal time to stock up on their precious materials. Every tailor had their own secret stash of contacts, often involving back-alley negotiations with dubious merchants who were all too willing to sell slightly less than acceptable fabrics at a discount. "This silk has just a few minor flaws," they would say, a mischievous twinkle in their eye, only visible under close scrutiny or in harsh lighting. A risky gamble, indeed, but one that could pay off handsomely if the tailor managed to create a robe that looked like 1,000,000 denarii while costing a mere pittance. Adrian. Now, the Byzantine emperors, ever the savvy rulers, capitalized on this chaotic fabric market. They imposed taxes on the importation of silks, which conveniently lined the coffers of the imperial treasury. But here's where it gets even more convoluted. Each type of silk was categorized, and hence taxed, according to its quality, length, and even the intricacy of the patterns woven into it. A simple hem might seem like a trivial detail, but it had economic implications that rippled through the entire empire. So, as you can see, the humble hem length was not merely a matter of aesthetics. It was entangled in the complex web of Byzantine capitalism. As the empire expanded, the need for uniformity in robe specifications grew. Enter the infamous Bureau of Imperial Attire, a shadowy organization with a reputation for red tape that could rival a Byzantine labyrinth. This bureau was responsible for issuing decrees on hem lengths and overseeing their enforcement. Now, imagine a horde of bureaucrats huddled around a table, debating the merits of a 2-inch versus a 3-inch hem now. It's enough to make one's head spin. Their deliberations often turned into passionate arguments, with one bureaucrat insisting that anything shorter than 3 inches was an affront to the dignity of the empire. "How can we expect our senators to command respect when they look like they've borrowed their robes from an errant peasant?" he would cry, while another would counter, "But think of the economy. The shorter the hem, the less fabric we need to buy. We could save a fortune." And so, endless minutes turned into hours, hours turned into days, and days turned into a bureaucratic quagmire that seemed insurmountable. Eventually, after what could only be described as a marathon of insipid discussions, they would reach a consensus, draft a decree, and then, ironically, take weeks to distribute it across the empire. Postal services, while much improved during the Byzantine period, still suffered from delays that would often leave decrees lost in transit, or worse, misdelivered to the wrong region. Imagine a village in Thrace receiving a decree about hem lengths intended for an aristocrat in Constantinople. The resulting confusion could spark fashion riots, as townsfolk either flaunted their newly sanctioned hems or, in a fit of rebellion, opted for an anarchic disregard for length altogether. Why? Well, of course, this wasn't just a Byzantine phenomenon. Similar regulations popped up across the Mediterranean with varying degrees of absurd. In some regions, you could be fined for wearing the color purple unless you could prove your lineage traced back to a noble family. In others, the length of your tunic could determine your eligibility for certain civic duties. It was a veritable minefield of fashion faux pas, and the Byzantine Empire was no exception. And as we meander through this vast tapestry of historical minutiae, let us not forget the impact of these regulations on the everyday lives of the average Byzantine citizen. The pressure to conform to the fashionable standards set by the elite trickled down like a slow leak in a damaged aqueduct. Suddenly, the average tailor found themselves overwhelmed with a cacophony of requests for hem alterations. "Make mine shorter, but not too short. I need a hem that'll impress the prefect, but also one that allows me to run away from the occasional street." Bro! This led to the rise of the so-called hemming parties, where citizens would gather to discuss the latest hem trends while partaking in copious amounts of wine. These gatherings often devolved into heated debates about the moral implications of hem lengths, a discussion that would make even the most ardent philosopher roll their eyes in disbelief. At the center of it all was a simple truth: fashion, no matter how frivolous it may seem, had the power to shape societies, influence economies, and determine political futures. So the next time you find yourself gazing at your wardrobe, perhaps contemplating whether your pants should hover above or below the ankle, take a moment to appreciate the depth of history that lies behind such simple choices. In the Byzantine Empire, every hem length was more than just a measurement. It was a statement, a reflection of one's place in the grand hierarchy of existence. And that, my dear viewers, is the kind of riveting existential crisis that keeps historians like us awake at night, long after the sun has set on the empire of hem lengths in Messiah. As we delve deeper into the Byzantine obsession with hem lengths, we must not overlook the meticulous inventory procedures that ensured imperial robes were not only fashionable, but also compliant with the ever-evolving edicts governing hem lengths. The Byzantine bureaucracy was a labyrinth of red tape, overseen by officials whose titles alone could leave one breathless. The logothete of the dromos, the praepositus of the wardrobe, and the ever-imposing keeper of the imperial fo. Each of these individuals was tasked with the grave responsibility of overseeing the compliance of hem lengths with imperial standards, a duty that could make or break an official's career, assuming, of course, they survived the inevitable hem length audits. Picture this. An opulent storehouse filled to the brim with fabrics of every conceivable hue and texture, from the richest silks of Antioch to the modest wool of the rural hinterlands. The role of the inventory clerk was perhaps one of the most prestigious, yet woefully underappreciated positions in Byzantine society. These clerks would spend countless hours meticulously logging every inch of fabric, every strand of gold thread, and every tassel, ensuring that the empire's sartorial standards were upheld. They wielded their quills like swords, ready to strike down any transgressor who dared to meddle with the sacred decree of hem length. Now, let's talk about the costs involved. The Byzantine economy, despite its many complexities, was largely driven by the textile industry. A single imperial robe could cost as much as a small village's annual grain yield, which led to a rather interesting dilemma. How does one justify the expense of a robe that may very well be more than just a garment, but a symbol of power, authority, and a symbol of power? Of course, impeccable taste. The cost of materials varied tremendously depending on the source. Silks imported from Persia were exorbitantly priced, while local wool could often be had for a pittance. However, nothing, not even a humble woolen robe, could be created without the infamous Byzantine taxation system, which was as convoluted as a bad plot twist in a Byzantine soap opera. In Calimus. Days. The types of fabrics used were dictated not only by availability, but also by the position of the wearer. The emperor, for instance, was expected to adorn himself in gold-threaded silk robes that cascaded to a length deemed acceptable by the most finicky of fashionistas. Meanwhile, a lowly bureaucrat might be relegated to wearing a simple woolen tunic, hemmed just above the ankle, an absolute scandal in the eyes of the elite. The disparity in fabric quality was a reflection of societal hierarchy, and woe betide anyone who dared to mix their fabrics inappropriately. Imagine the chaos that would ensue if a senator were caught wearing a robe that bore the material of a commoner. The mere thought sends shivers down the spine of any self-respecting Byzantine citizen. Such a faux pas could lead to public disgrace, and perhaps even a notice of disfavor from the emperor himself. A fate worse than 1,000 hem-length violations. Then there was the matter of the imperial wardrobes, bureaucratic rules. Each robe had its own official specification sheet, detailing not just the materials and colors allowed, but also the acceptable hem lengths based on the wearer's status. The hem length for an emperor was a staggering 1.5 meters from the ground, an extravagant display that left little room for error. Any deviation from this length could result in the unfortunate individual being dragged before a council of fashion experts to justify their choice, a punishment akin to public speaking for the socially awkward. Ray, imagine sitting in an ornate hall, surrounded by your peers, as you nervously defend your choice of a hem that falls a mere 10 centimeters short of the prescribed length. Well, Your Excellency, I thought a more practical length would allow for easier movement during the upcoming military campaign. Yes, my dear viewers, such justifications were as likely to earn you a round of applause as they were to earn you a one-way ticket to the dungeons, where no hem length could save you from your fate. Trade routes were also fraught with danger, not just from marauding bandits, but from the very real threat of defective materials. A shipment of silk could arrive with hems that were deemed unacceptable or unapproved, leading to further bureaucratic headaches as officials scrambled to rectify the situation. The Byzantine Empire had an entire department devoted to inspecting incoming textiles, the aptly named Department of Textile Approval and Hem Measurement, or as it was colloquially known, the DATHM. These professionals were well versed in the complexities of fabric quality and hem specifications, equipped with rulers and measuring tapes like warriors of fashion battling against the tyranny of mediocrity. And let us not forget the role of the tailors, those unsung heroes of the Byzantine imperial fashion scene. These artisans were responsible for creating the robes, according to the precise specifications handed down by the bureaucratic overlord. A good tailor could find themselves in the midst of a scandal at the drop of a thread. The pressure was immense, especially considering that an imperial robe was not merely a piece of clothing. It was a testament to the skill and artistry of the maker. The wrong hem length could lead to ruinous consequences, including public disgrace, or in the worst-case scenario, a swift trip to the dungeons. The tailors had their own guilds, with rules as strict as those enforced by the Imperial Council. Membership required passing rigorous trials, including demonstrating proficiency in measuring hem lengths to the nearest millimeter and crafting the perfect pleat. Those who failed could find their careers shattered, forced to return to their villages with their tails, hemmed or otherwise, between their legs. As the Byzantine Empire expanded, so too did the complexity of these regulations. Different regions began to develop their own interpretations of the hem length law, leading to a patchwork of standards that would make even the most seasoned bureaucrat weep. While Constantinople remained the heart of hem length fashion, provinces like Thrace and Asia Minor began to adopt their own, often bizarre, interpretations of imperial decree. Some even dared to experiment with asymmetrical hems, an affront to tradition that could lead to scandalous gossip echoing through the marble halls of the palace. Yes, gossip. The lifeblood of any courtly society. The slightest deviation from the hem length standard would spark rumors faster than you could say lengthy legislation. Did you hear about the senator's wife? She wore a hem so short that it's rumored she was denied entrance to the palace. The ramifications were real and immediate. The icy glare of disapproving courtiers could freeze even the most flamboyant of fashions in their tracks. In summary, the Byzantine obsession with imperial robe hem length specifications was a multifaceted affair that encapsulated the very essence of their society. From the bureaucratic labyrinth to the skilled artisans responsible for crafting these garments, every detail was steeped in tradition, power, and a healthy dose of absurdity. So, as you ponder your own wardrobe dilemmas, remember, a hem length is not just a measurement. It's a historical narrative intertwined with the fabric of an entire civilization. And as dull as it may seem, it's these obscure details that keep the wheels of history turning, even if they do turn at a rather leisurely pace. Mind the way. But dear viewers, if you think we've reached the limits of tedium with hem lengths, prepare yourself for the next thrilling chapter in our saga of Byzantine fashion bureaucracy. The inventory procedures of imperial garments. Yes, that's right. The Byzantine Empire was not just about opulent parties and intricate politics. It was also the birthplace of what we might call inventory mania. Imagine a grand warehouse filled with bolts of silk, wool, and the occasional hide of an exotic animal, probably a giraffe or something equally ridiculous. This was the storeroom of the imperial wardrobe, an enormous, sprawling facility akin to a medieval Costco, but with fewer samples of hummus and more embroidered robes. The employees of this grand establishment were not your average workers. No, they were the elite of the elite, the fabric whisperers, the thread tacticians, and they had to follow a labyrinthine set of rules to ensure that every item was accounted for. Every single piece of fabric purchased for imperial robes had to be meticulously recorded. Not just the type of fabric, oh no, that would be far too simple, but also the provenance, the vendor, the cost per meter, and even the time of day when the purchase was made. Yes, you heard that right. Purchasing silk at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday was apparently more significant than your average Tuesday afternoon. This level of detail was crucial for the bureaucrats who had to justify every penny spent to the imperial treasury. What? The cost of materials, as you might guess, was another exciting topic worthy of our attention. Silk, that oh-so-luxurious fabric, was imported from far-off lands like China, and the cost was astronomical. We're talking about a price that could rival a small fortune. Perhaps enough to buy a chariot or two, or a rather nice estate on the outskirts of Constantinople. Wool, being more plentiful, was a bit cheaper, but still required a financial commitment that could make a nobleman think twice. And let's not forget the artisans themselves. Crafting an imperial robe was no small feat. It involved skilled tailors who, under the vigilant eye of a bureaucratic overseer, would stitch, embroider, and hem these garments into existence. Each artisan had to be registered, and their work inspected, much like an elaborate system of medieval quality control. We can only assume that the quality inspectors wielded their own set of very specific measuring tapes, each marked with the precise length of imperial hem specifications, of course. The process of approving a new hem length for imperial robes was akin to navigating a bureaucratic minefield. Imagine a group of rather serious-looking senators gathered in a dimly lit room, discussing the merits of a half-inch versus a full inch. Their debates, while lacking the spectacle of gladiatorial combat, were no less fierce. Proponents of longer hems argued for the added dignity and gravitas it would lend to the wearer, while opponents lamented the potential for tripping hazards during state functions. "What if the emperor stumbles?" they exclaimed, their voices echoing off the stone walls. "The empire's reputation could be ruined." And just when you think you've heard it all, there were actual committees formed to address these pressing concerns. Yes, committees. You know, those groups of well-meaning individuals who gather to ponder the most mundane aspects of life while entirely missing the big picture. These committees would review hem lengths, material costs, and artisan qualifications, often resulting in more paperwork than actual decision-making. They might have well named them the Committee for the Maintenance of Mediocre Measurements. But wait, the excitement doesn't stop there. Each robe had to be assigned a unique inventory number, an alphanumeric code that would make even the most seasoned accountant nod with approval. These numbers were critical for tracking the garment's journey from the storeroom to the imperial wardrobe, and eventually to the emperor himself. Yes, I'm talking about a system so complex that even a seasoned bureaucrat might have needed a flowchart to keep track. Then, there were the annual audits. Oh, the joy of audits. A select group of bureaucrats would descend upon the storeroom, armed with their scrolls and quills, ready to scrutinize every inch of fabric and every stitch of embroidery. You can imagine the tension as they combed through the records, comparing the actual inventory against the meticulously documented lists. Ah yes, a discrepancy here, one might say, waving a scroll like a sword. This hem length was recorded as 1 inch, yet here it is, a whopping 1.5 inches. What do you have to say for yourself? The very thought of such a scandal could send ripples of panic through the ranks of the tailors and artisans. After all, a minor clerical error could lead to an official reprimand. Or worse, a very awkward dinner with the emperor where you had to explain your sartorial slip-up. And let's not forget the dreaded hem-length revision meetings. Those gatherings where tailors, artisans, and committee members would huddle around a table to discuss the latest findings from the royal court. We need to discuss the hem lengths again, one might sigh, as the others groaned in unison. It seems the emperor prefers a more modest length for his ceremonial appearances. What do we think about 2 inches instead of 2.5? At this point, the conversation would descend into a debate that could only be described as a battle of wills. But Your Excellency, if we reduce the hem length, it could impact the airflow of the garment, lead into discomfort. Comfort. This is the Byzantine Empire. We don't do comfort, we do spectacle. And just like that, the debate would rage on, fueled by the fervor of fabric enthusiasts and the weight of tradition. It was, after all, a matter of honor, both for the artisans who crafted these garments and the bureaucratic overseers who insisted on maintaining the integrity of imperial fashion. Through all of this, one must wonder, what did the average citizen think about all of this hem-length hullabaloo? Were they sitting in their homes, sipping on their watered-down wine, nodding along as they heard the latest gossip from the court? Did you hear they changed the official hem length again? Apparently, it's now an even 2 inches. The answer is, of course, lost to history. Perhaps they cared, or perhaps they simply rolled their eyes and returned to their day-to-day lives, which undoubtedly involved their own mundane troubles. But for those within the imperial circle, the hem lengths of robes were a matter of life and death. Well, perhaps not death, but certainly a matter of social standing and dignity. In the grand tapestry of history, it's these endless, monotonous details that intertwine to form the fabric of a civilization. They may seem trivial, but they serve as a reminder of the human penchant for order, even in the most absurd corners of existence. So, the next time you find yourself tangled up in the minutiae of everyday life, take a moment to appreciate the Byzantine Empire's fervent obsession with robe hem lengths. And perhaps, just perhaps, you'll find a little joy in the mundane as well. I know. The Byzantine Empire, a realm of towering cathedrals, philosophical debates, and of course, imperial robes that could make or break a noble's career, had an entire bureaucratic apparatus dedicated to managing the hem lengths of these garments. Imagine a grand room filled with meticulously organized scrolls, each inscribed with the latest specifications. In this sacred space of tedium, scribes would argue passionately, if that's what you could call it, over the critical question of whether a hem should measure precisely 2 inches or 2 1/4. Such riveting discussions could last for hours, and I assure you, no one ever left the room with a sense of excitement. Inventory procedures regarding imperial attire were a marvel of inefficiency. Every hem length change initiated a complex series of events that would make a modern-day supply chain manager weep. Imagine the Byzantine equivalent of a warehouse filled with bolts of silk, wool, and the occasional goat skin. Each material was cataloged with an almost obsessive level of detail. The color, texture, and, most importantly, hem length were all recorded on scrolls that could rival the length of Homer's epics. Indeed. The cost of materials was another thrilling chapter in this saga of sameness. The empire was known for its luxurious fabrics, often dyed with colors that would make even the most extravagant, modern fashionista blush. However, the cost of these materials fluctuated like the Byzantine political landscape. One day, The price of royal purple might be a mere pittance, while the next, it could soar to unmanageable heights, causing a potential hem-length crisis. Imagine a nobleman trying to get a new robe, only to find that the price of the requisite silk for a 2-inch hem had quintupled overnight. The horror! Bureaucratic rules were established to maintain order amid the chaos of fashion. For instance, a decree might stipulate that all robes worn by the emperor must adhere strictly to the latest hem length. This rule extended to all courtiers, who were required to submit their wardrobe for inspection. Picture this: a courtier nervously presenting his latest ensemble to a panel of fashion judges, all armed with rulers, and ready to measure the hem with the precision of a medieval surgeon. If the hem fell short, the consequences were dire. A short hem could lead to social ostracism, while an overly long hem could be interpreted as an affront to the empire's sense of propriety. The hem length specifications, while seemingly innocuous, were also a reflection of the hierarchy within the court. The emperor's robe, for instance, was expected to have a hem length of 2 inches, while a mere duke might be consigned to a measly 1.5 inches. The implications were clear. The higher the hem, the higher your social standing. If you are caught in a situation where you wore a robe with the wrong hem length, you might as well have been donning a sandwich board that read, "I'm a complete nobody." This obsession with hem length also extended to the types of stitching used. The Byzantine tailors, skilled artisans in their own right, were required to adhere to strict guidelines when it came to the finishing of hems. A double-stitched hem was considered the gold standard, whereas a single stitch was the equivalent of showing up to a black tie event in flip-flops. Can you imagine? The horror! Those poor tailors spent hours perfecting their work, knowing that a single misstep could lead to their own social downfall. And yes, there were also annual audits where officials would comb through the imperial wardrobe, measuring hems, assessing stitches, and cataloging the results with the same fervor that one might reserve for a census. These audits were not without their own drama. Imagine a nervous tailor, sweating profusely as he awaited judgment. Would he be lauded for his perfect hems, or would he be exiled to the provinces for producing a robe that was 1/8 of an inch too long? Such stakes! It wasn't just the nobles who had to worry about hem lengths. Even the commoners felt the ripple effects of these regulations. Though they may not have worn the royal purple, their garments were often inspired by the latest imperial fashions. The latest hem-length decrees would trickle down to the marketplace, and tailors, ever eager to please, would adjust their own standards accordingly. A commoner's hem might be set at a more lenient 3 inches, but the pressure to stay in fashion was ever present. Material costs had a cascading impact on the populace as well. A sudden rise in the price of wool could mean that the average citizen would have to forgo their own fashionable robe, opting instead for something less ostentatious, a tunic with a hem length that shouted, "I'm just trying to get by." And so, the hem length specifications became a way for the elites to not only distinguish themselves, but also to perpetuate their status atop the social ladder. Now, we can't forget about the Byzantine bureaucrat, the true unsung hero of this saga. These individuals were the clerks and scribes of the empire, tasked with the monumental job of recording every decree about hem lengths, material costs, and inspections. Their day-to-day life revolved around the minutiae of imperial garb. Imagine yourself in their shoes, surrounded by piles of dusty scrolls, quills in hand, as you record the latest hem length updates. It was a world where excitement was measured in inches, and the thrill of a new decree could make your heart race if your heart was particularly susceptible to the excitement of bureaucratic procedures. One can only wonder what these bureaucrats did in their spare time. Did they gather around for a friendly game of measure the hem? Perhaps they engaged in lively debates about the philosophical implications of a 2.5-inch hem, versus a 3-inch hem. I can see them now, passionately discussing the aesthetics and symbolism of hem lengths over a cup of lukewarm wine. The hem length is not just a measurement, it's a statement. One might declare, waving an overly long scroll around for emphasis. Their colleagues would nod earnestly, engaging in an intellectual exercise that would surely enthrall anyone who happened to be passing by. Aiming, though. The Byzantine Empire, in all its glory, was not just an arena for military strategy or theological debates. It was a world where the hem lengths of robes dictated social interactions and shaped the very fabric of society. Amidst the grand narratives of conquests and betrayals, it is the mundane details, the shifting specifications of hem lengths, that reveal the intricate mechanisms of power and prestige. Aye. As we dive deeper into this world of absurdity, we must appreciate how something as trivial as a hem length can hold such sway over an empire. For those who lived in the shadow of the Byzantine court, life was a delicate dance of fabric and stature, where the difference of a mere inch could spell the difference between acceptance and exile. So, the next time you find yourself fretting over an outfit choice, remember the Byzantine Empire's regal obsession with hem lengths. Who knew that a simple measurement could encapsulate the essence of an era? And thus, the story continues, woven into the endless narrative of human history, where the humdrum and the extraordinary coexist in a delicate balance, and where the saga of the hem-length specifications remains forever enshrined in the annals of absurd. Well, inshallah. And there you have it, folks. The thrilling saga of Byzantine imperial robe hem length specifications. Who knew that a simple measurement could spark such riveting debates and cause emperors to lose their minds over fabric inches? From the lavishly long hems that trailed through the halls of power, to the scandalous short hems that threatened the very fabric of imperial dignity. We've unraveled a tale so riveting it could put a speed limit sign to sleep. So the next time you're draped in a robe, or, just a bathrobe, remember the Byzantine emperors who fought tooth and nail over hem lengths while the rest of the world was busy inventing, the wheel. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the heart of fashion faux pas, give us a thumbs up, subscribe for more mind-numbing historical gems, and drop a comment about your favorite hem length. And don't forget, turn on loop for a continuous flow of this riveting content.